Yo, what's good, YouTube, man? It's Gary Rogers on the Fan TV. Back action on the video. At the content of this video, go smash that like button at the content of this channel. Go ahead and subscribe, man. Look, so the Ravens played their first preseason game last night. They win 24-16. We'll talk about the good, bad, and the ugly from that game, right? When it comes to preseason, right, now that we're not worried about preseason streaks, even though I was never worried about that, right? It's not really about the wins or the losses, right? It's about, who played well, who didn't play well, what was coming out of training camp that, looks very, very true because now we're seeing it in live game action, right? So let's just get right into it, okay? So the bad, right off top, Ravens rookie Bilal Kone, 6th-round rookie cornerback, right, goes down with a major leg injury, major knee injury, okay? So we're talking about torn ACL and MCL. Obviously, he's going to be out for the year. All right, now very, very unfortunate for him. He's a guy that the Ravens liked. Obviously, that's why they drafted him. But, he was a solid training camp, but he's been dealing with injuries kind of back to back, right? He had a shoulder injury early on, and now he's dealing with his knee injury, right? So, as a 6th-round rookie, there was no guarantee for him to make this team anyway. But obviously that's not going to be in the cards of him this year. Maybe the Ravens keep him around, keep him on IR, reevaluate him next year, go from there. But unfortunately, his season is definitely over with. You never want to see that, but that's the game of football. It goes that way sometimes, right? So, prayers for him, his speedy recovery, and maybe we'll see him out there next year, right? After he's fully recovered. Okay. All right. Now, so we'll do bad for the offense. Okay. The backup quarterback situation is just as dire as has been reported on training camp, right? When I've talked about Devin Leary, Cooper Rush, during these videos, training camp videos, it hasn't been too much positive. It's been a lot of negative things, right? You got to think these guys are mainly going against 2s and 3s and stuff like that, and it hasn't been very, very positive. Okay, going into the game last night, playing the game last night, it wasn't very positive last night either, right? So we're talking about Devin Leary, 3 for 12, 43 yards, 1 interception, 7.3 passer rating. Cooper Rush, 2 for 4, 16 yards, 1 interception, 20.8 passer rating. Okay, now for him, obviously only 4 attempts, but his very first pass attempt was an interception, right? So if Lamar, it really happens to Lamar Jackson, right? I'm not going to say it, it really happens to Lamar Jackson. The Ravens are screwed anyway. That's just how it is. You have a quarterback that's an MVP candidate, should have won the MVP last year, whatever. He goes down, you're screwed anyway. It doesn't really matter. But the Ravens don't look to have at least serviceable backup play. And honestly, they haven't had serviceable backup play since they let go of Snoop Huntley. And I'm not even a big Snoop Huntley guy. I'm not, right? Back then when we were talking about him starting and everything, I thought it was a little too much anyway. But Josh Johnson last year in the preseason looked very, very bad. He was very bad in training camp. And the Ravens spent a little bit more money, right? So they got out of the Josh Johnson, carousel, right? Spent a little bit more money, got Cooper Rush, and he hasn't been very, very impressive to start off with. That's just the honest truth, right? He hasn't been very impressive, right? So it kind of is what it is when it comes to that, right? The Ravens will make their adjustments, and hopefully, Lamar will stay healthy, and he's been healthy the last couple of years, and I'm just gonna go with the mindset that's not going to change, right? Lamar Jackson is a very, very smart player, knows how to protect himself, so we're going to be good. That's the mindset. That's the mindset I have about that. All right. Next, Dan Falele. Okay, Dan Falele was also pretty bad last night. All right. Now the issue with I got something in my eye, y'all. Hold on. The issue with Falele is not the fact that he's bad, right? No, it's really not the fact that he's bad because it's not his fault entirely. All right, where the blame lies, right? Let me get my thought together. The blame lies in the fact that John Harbaugh has openly come on and said that this is not a competition. That's where the problem. That's where the problem is, right? Dan Falele was not good enough last year to come into this year walking into the starting right guard job, right? If there's going to be a competition on the left side, there's also should be a competition on the right side, right? Falele did nothing last year to say, oh, he's a nailed-on starter. There's only 3 guys that played well enough last year to be nailed-on starters on this team, and we know who they are, obviously. It's Ronnie Stanley, Roger Rosengarten, Tyler Linderbaum, right? The guard positions were up for grabs, right? But John Harbaugh picks his favorites. He picks his people who are in the doghouse, and that eliminates competition. I'm not trying to get on the whole John Harbaugh is bad rant and things like that, but comes directly from being from John Harbaugh's fault. All right, because from the early on, no, Falele is our guy. He's dropped the weight. He's the starter. Why? Why is there no competition for him? Right? Why even bring back Ben Cleveland, who played well last night, if he wasn't even going to compete for the job? It doesn't make any sense, right? Now, Falele got bull rushed by one of the Colts players, right? Ended up that's the sack that Cooper Rush took, right? So you know, if it's Lamar Jackson, maybe he escapes that, right? It is what, you know what I mean? Who knows, right? But point being, Falele doesn't look any better this year than he did last year, and that's going to be a serious problem for the Ravens if they want to be a serious Super Bowl contender, right? The main theory you want to have for offensive line play is the no tomato can theory, right? That's what I got from Daniel Jeremiah, right? Basically is you don't need 5 great offensive linemen, right? You just need your weakest link offensive lineman not to be bad. If your weakest link offensive lineman is average to above average, you're going to be great because the line works together as a unit. But if there's one guy that they can pick on, your offensive line is going to struggle because that one guy is going to continue to get picked on because defenses are too good. They're going to isolate him and say, hey, we're going after that guy. And Falele is going to be that guy. And we're just going to call it how it is. He's going to be that guy. All right. But it's not his fault, right? John Harbaugh should have put him in the competition. He didn't. We'll see what happens. He can bounce back. It's week 1 of preseason. He can bounce back. But, I wasn't too excited about that. All right. Now, enough about the bad. All right. So off to the good, right? Because there was a lot of good last night, right? There was a lot of good last night. Okay. Let's start with the Ravens offense. Keaton Mitchell is back, right? Keaton Mitchell is fast. He's explosive. He looks like the player that we last saw in 2023, right? In his rookie season. Okay. When the Ravens, like they got, lightning in the bottle, right? He was everywhere. Okay. Last year, he didn't have that. He didn't trust his knee. That first season after a major knee injury is always a little rough for players, right? They always say it's that season after the knee surgery, right? So, you get injured, you're out, had a surgery, you come back, you're not feeling 100%. That next season, if you get back to that's when you're going to get back to 100%. And I would say Keaton is probably close to 100% as he's going to be, right? He was fast, he was explosive, multiple runs where he's cut inside out, weaving, great touchdown run. I think it was 22-yard touchdown run, something like that. So great runs, weaving in and out. That burst, that cut, that all like that was back for Keaton Mitchell, right? So that was very, very positive to see. I don't need to see Keaton Mitchell in no more preseason games. He's done. Let the rest of the backup running backs, get their turn at it, right? See what they can provide. All right. Now continuing on, I guess offense and special teams, right? LaJohntay Wester, right? LaJohntay Wester is a guy when the Ravens drafted him, I said he's going to be a standout throughout the training camp, throughout the preseason period, right? Because we're going to hear his name because he's too good of a player, right? Whether you're talking about wide receiver or catching punts, he's too good of a player. We're going to hear his name, right? So him popping last night is not a surprise to me at all, right? This is a guy that I've been waiting to hear his name more and more and more. And we started this last, I would say, week and a half ago, we started to hear his name more about in the preseason, in the training camp, reports, right? He's looking good, catching the field in the ball, he's getting open on routes, right? We start to hear that a little bit more, right? So last night, LaJohntay Wester goes 2 catches, 41 yards, right? But the big thing is the fact that he took a punt return to the house, okay? He caught it aggressively, juke in and out to the crib, right? And for LaJohntay Wester, right, when I watched him, because like I said, I mention this every time now, but when I watched him in Colorado, he was one of their better receivers, right? Obviously, Travis Hunter was their number 2 overall pick and, great player that he is, right? But LaJohntay Wester was their next guy, right? And he wasn't like a slouch or far behind. Like, he was right there. He's a really, really good, talented receiver. But, due to his size and things like that, he's going to have to start off in that punt returner role, right? And then prove he can earn snaps at receiver. But he's going to do just fine as punt returner, right? He made the 53-man roster last night. To me, he's officially locked up his position as the Ravens punt returner for this season. And I'm excited for him because he's a player that I really enjoyed watching in college, and I'm really excited the Ravens went and drafted him too, right? So, shout out to LaJohntay Wester, right? Okay, on the other side of the ball, we can talk about, let's see, on the other side of the ball, we can talk about Mike Green and Adisa Isaac, right? So Mike Green flashed, got around the corner, got a sack, or at least he got to the quarterback, right? I'm not sure if they credit him or Adisa with the sack. Same with Adisa Isaac, right? Flashed around the corner. It was like 3 Ravens that met at the quarterback, right? You love to see that, okay? David Ojabo got a sack. That's the play that Anthony Richardson, broke his pinky. Like if y'all see the picture, Anthony Richardson pinky is going, that way. You know what I'm saying? So, but anyway, the Ravens defensive line in general looked very good, very active. They were getting after the quarterback. My biggest thing for the Ravens defense, right? Has always been for the last couple years, right? Can the Ravens get home when they send 4 people, right? Do the Ravens always need to blitz? Always had simulated pressures, trying to confuse the offense to actually get somebody free to the quarterback? Do they all have to do that, right? Because in the playoffs, when you're going against better quarterbacks, smarter quarterbacks, better offensive coordinators, they're going to see some of those blitzes coming. You're going to get burned, and you're going to get burned behind, right? Versus bad teams, you can get those off all day, okay? But good teams in the playoffs can win with 4. Right? We see the Eagles defensive line, monsters, right? You know what I mean? So you just go back down to the Super Bowl champions of the past, you'll see that all their defensive lines have guys on there where they can get home with 4, right? They don't have to send a bunch of blitzes all the time. So for the Ravens, that's the big step, right? You got Van Noy, you got Owe, okay? Who else from that edge room is going to join them? Tavis Robinson going to take a leap. David Ojabo, like I said, got a sack, look good. Mike Green is continuously to be impressive, right? He is so fast off the edge and so bendy, so twitchy. You can see why he's, if it wasn't for everything off the field and all the, allegations and whatnot, you would see why he would have been a first-round pick, right? If it was just a clean slate, nothing to worry about. But, for the Ravens, he fell. Okay, so, yeah, man, I was very, very impressed with what the defensive line did, last night. Right? You know what I mean? You got Aeneas Peebles getting the pass breakup. He's very active. He's another guy that's going to help on the interior when it comes to rushing, right? But this Ravens team seems to have a lot of talent when we're just talking about the defensive line, right? So I want to see how the rotations work. I want to see how the defense comes together. Obviously week 1 when we're going against live competition, but for just off of game 1, I'm very, very pleased with what I saw from the defensive line, right? So to me, those are very, very key and obvious positives, right? Some other positives, right? Before we wrap this up, Ben Cleveland, I talked about him a little bit earlier. He was actually decent last night, moving people around. If it was a true right guard competition, Ben Cleveland probably will win the job with Falele, right? And for whatever reason, the Ravens just don't want that, or John Harbaugh doesn't want that, right? He's the guy coaching the team. He makes the personnel decisions, right? So I'm just going to lay that on him. For whatever reason, he doesn't want that. It is what it is, right? But Ben Cleveland, I thought looked good last night. Every time Ben Cleveland plays, right, he's not a spectacular player, but he's solid. He's good enough, right? He's a guy that doesn't really get too much wrong, So if I go back to I said, what about, the no tomato can theory, right? No bad plays with the offensive line, Ben Cleveland will fit that because he will be a average to slightly above average offensive lineman, right? And on this Ravens offensive line, that's really all they need, right? They don't need, it's hard to get 5 great offensive linemen, right? That's just not really a realistic thought. If you can get a couple of great guys and the rest of the guys be solid, you're on the way. The Ravens are already there. They have 2 great players for sure, and Linderbaum and Stanley, and a potentially very, very good player in Rosengarten, right? Rosengarten held his own last year. So I'm not going to say he's great just yet because I want to see it again. But last year, he was good enough, way past good enough, right? And Voorhees, he takes the step. When he played, after the injury, he was solid. Ben Cleveland, if he plays, he's more likely just going to be solid. That's what the Ravens need, right? Falele just can't be bad. You get what I'm saying? So if Falele continues to be bad, the Ravens have to reevaluate this whole there's no competition on the right side theory. It can't work like that, all right? But I'm going to wrap it up here, man. So, the Ravens, very, very good night overall, right? I would say it was more good than bad, right? But the bad did stick out, right guard, quarterback, things like that. That did stick out. I didn't mention Tyler Loop, right? Tyler Loop went 1 for 2. He missed the 46-yard field goal. He made a 52-yard field goal, so good bounce back. But we want to see that 2 for 2, right? Make the 46-yard for sure, right? But the good Mike Green, Adisa Isaac, that young Ravens defensive line, David Ojabo, all flash last night. Keaton Mitchell, that speed, that burst, that lightning ability is back. LaJohntay Wester, right? A guy that I'm not surprised that he's making plays, but I'm glad to see that he's doing it in the preseason games, right? Where it's live action, right? I'm glad to see it. So those are my thoughts from last night, right? On kind of an up and down preseason game. Give me your thoughts in the comments. Give me guys that stood out to you, your standout performers, right? But we'll leave it there. It's Gary Roach on the Fan TV. I'm out.